The Ansari Institute presents Engaged, Religion and the Common Good, a conversation series exploring questions relating to global affairs and the human condition. Hello, everyone. I'm Charles Powell. The series covers a variety of topics, from poverty and peace to climate change and good governance, as well as tradition and technology. Our conversations engage local and global partners, including students, educators, and journalists. For suggestions on topics and themes, please email us at ansari@nd.edu. Today, I'm joined by Assistant Professor of Religious Studies and Theology at St. Mary's College at Notre Dame, Dr. Margaret Gower. She earned her PhD from Harvard University. Some of her academic interests include Christian theology, history of Christianity, and spirituality. Margaret, I think most of us refer to her as Molly, is also a faculty affiliate of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. Molly, thank you for joining me for this conversation.
My pleasure to be here today, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you. This past August, the Ansari Institute sent a delegation to the Parliament of the World's Religions, which was held in Chicago. The first parliament was held in Chicago in 1893. It was the first of its kind to bring together interfaith leaders from around the world. The goal was to bring together world religious leaders on common ground. That was over 130 years ago. The Ansari Institute was a major partner in the 2023 convening of the Parliament. The theme of the Parliament was a call to conscience, a call to action, a call to conscience, a call to action. One of the critical issues discussed at the Parliament was the topic of toward a global ethic. The global ethic is a landmark declaration of the Parliament of the World's Religions, stating the universal values and principles shared by the world's religious, spiritual, and cultural traditions. Though it emerged from consultations with scholars and religious leaders from many of the world's religions and regions, the global ethic is a statement of basic ethical commitments shared by people throughout the globe, religious or not. Several from our delegation spoke on global ethic panels. Molly was one of them. The Global Ethic Committee put forth 5 irrevocable directives. Here they are. Number 1, commitment to a culture of nonviolence and respect for life. Number 2, commitment to a culture of solidarity and a just economic order. Number 3, commitment to a culture of tolerance and a life of truthfulness. Number 4, commitment to a culture of equal rights and partnership between men and women. And number 5, commitment to a culture of sustainability and care for the earth. Molly, you spoke on the 3rd directive, commitment to a culture of tolerance and a life of truthfulness. Can you share with us, at least in your mind, what does such a commitment look like?
Yes, thank you, Charles. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And of course, I'm so grateful and so pleased to be a part of the Ansari Institute. It enriches my thought, my scholarship greatly. Thank you for these many opportunities. The 3rd directive of the Declaration lifts up the values of tolerance and truthfulness and connects them to what it means to be trustworthy. I appreciate this opportunity to envision an alternative to the status quo, to envision a world where across difference, we can extend trust across difference and be people who trust each other and people who have earned one another's trust. I think that trust follows from honesty and accountability. And rereading this directive in preparation for our conversation today, in addition to the words truthfulness and tolerance, the words life and culture stood out to me. These are practical ideals. This directive is more than declaring. It is prescribing practices that I want to honor and advance. So I think that the conclusion of the directive, it's brief, maybe 4 or 5 pages long. It concludes with a call and with some practical directions for how we can be truthful and trustworthy, how we can be people who tell the truth, seek the truth, and serve truth. And in a special way, the directive asks all people of the world. That's who the directive, the declaration is offered to the people of the world. It invites us to find ways to affirm pluralism without becoming indifferent to the truth, and not to mistake freedom with arbitrariness. I think that these are hard things and good things and urgent things for us to do today. Directive 3 connects speaking and acting truthfully, and it includes speaking and acting with compassion as a part of that, with steering clear of prejudice and hatred and disavowing fanaticism and intolerance. The directive and the document overall, it seems to me, asserts something that doesn't necessarily go without saying. But I think that the directive and the declaration, they seem to see a basic connection between truthfulness and pluralism. So it seems to me that the folks who authored this document and the many folks who signed on to it in 1993 are suggesting more than that tolerance across difference is good. They seem to be saying that tolerance across difference is an expression of the truth, and that intolerance or the absence of respect for difference seems to be fundamentally maybe muddled or confused. This seems between the lines, but very powerful to me. I really want to sort of think more about what that means.
Molly, during your presentation at the Parliament, you said Directive 3 raises a basic practical question. Here it is. How can we affirm pluralism and truthfulness, especially about particular theological truths, managing claims about the ultimate that are mutually exclusive? So I invite you to talk more about this, and perhaps you can provide us with a concrete example and then expound on what you mean.
Sure, thank you. First of all, this seems like an invitation to stand in a posture of humility, and I appreciate that. More and more, to me, it seems nearly idolatrous to suggest that the way in which one community in one time and one place experiences God, talks about God, practices relationship with God is somehow the sole or true or final form of the human relationship to the mystery of God. I read Walter Brueggemann first a long time ago, but more and more his words that God is not so reducible or possessible or controllable seem urgent to me. I think one experience, just a sort of anecdote from my own life, one experience that I had that made this very clear to me happened when it was 2017, and I traveled with 2 friends and colleagues to India. We participated in a program in New Delhi learning about Jainism, and I had the opportunity to travel around a bit with them. It was my first time in India, and I'm not trained in Indian religions, but I had the opportunity to travel with two scholars who participated in Ansari Institute events, Mugdha Ulekar at Cal State Fullerton and Niranjan Kaur Khalsa Baker at LMU in LA. The three of us had the opportunity to travel to India, and due to some work that Niranjan had to do, we had the chance to sit down with Maneka Gandhi, who at that time was serving as the Minister of Women and Child Development. The three of us were sitting there, and as I remember it, Maneka Gandhi said something to the effect of how troubled she was by the state of the world, and how and she made reference to her samsaric worldview as the foundation for her thinking about Indian state policies, something along those lines. And it just pierced me. It was this encounter with difference that was very familiar to me theoretically, but to sit down with an Indian state policymaker and sort of encounter her premising. She was building or proposing Indian state policies on the basis of a samsaric worldview, and the extent of that difference, that real difference from my operating assumptions about the way the world and the universe work, was really powerful. I experienced it as a surprise, even though maybe I was wrong to do that. I was surprised by it. I was interested in it, and I came to see like the differences between, like, theological differences are at work in the world in powerful ways. So it was a powerful encounter with religious difference at a moment when I didn't expect it. And it made me think about how we can pursue peace, the common good, life, how we can pursue life together in ways that see and honor our profound theological differences, don't erase it. So those are some of the things that the document has helped me to connect.
What a beautiful experience. Thank you for sharing that. I was sharing with you before we started this conversation that I very much enjoy teaching interreligious dialogue, especially through the lens of Vatican II. And every semester when I teach this course, I remind my students how important it is to build understanding, acceptable levels of trust so that we can connect and collaborate together on issues that in some way impact us all. And listening to what you said made me also think about a saying by Fred McFeely Rogers. I grew up on Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, and he is known for many different quotes, but one of my favorite quotes by him, as different as we are from one another, as unique as each one of us is, we are much more the same than we are different. That may be the most essential message of all as we help our children grow toward being caring, compassionate, and charitable adults. And I listened to this story that you just shared. You go into India, you meet like-minded people, people of goodwill. You meet with people who understand and appreciate how important it is to foster integral human development, to seek that understanding, to find that trust so that we can indeed work together to make the world a better place. And I honestly can think of no better person to be on such a delegation as yourself. So thank you for sharing that story. As a
Well, I love it. And I
follow-up,
think it's the relationships of trust too,
mm,
seem to me what makes that possible.
mm, yeah, the relationship of trust, very important. Yes. As a follow-up to this question, during the Parliament, you said, it seems to me that the coupling of truthfulness and pluralism in Directive 3 is an expression of the directive's broad commitment to democracy. So, my question to you is, how so?
Mm,
Moreover, what are some of those limitations that you see?
mm, sure. Well, I just think that the commentaries that accompany the directive in this edition of the text are really excellent. Of course, I appreciate what Hans Kung wrote, and in a special way, I really learned from the commentary offered by Karl Joseph Kuschel, Kung's colleague at Tübingen. And Kuschel points out that even the word parliament presupposes democracy. So it's not sort of coincidental, but it's, I think, deeply meaningful that from 1893, this gathering named itself Parliament. And when you think about, at least for me, when I think about what are the sort of like characteristic goods of a parliament or democracy, I think about open discussion, free debate, freedom in a more general sense, rights. Of course, elections might come to mind too. And I think that these characteristic features of what we think of as a political way of exchanging or encountering one another are also present in the parliament and built into, they're like cooked into the good of the declaration. Um, so I think that Kuschel is right that parliament presumes democracy, presupposes democracy. Parliament means legislative body elected by the people. So I think even in its name, from the first meeting in 1893 to the publication of the directive in 1993 until today, we see this work, the work of this gathering, as somehow political as well as religious. And when I think about the second sentence of Directive 3, the one set out in its opening paragraph, it sets truthfulness against demagoguery. It sets truthfulness against demagoguery for democracy directly. Directive 3 says that economic and demagogic forces lie to advance their own interests, undermining democracy. And I think about the work that's a part of my project, part of the work that I do on the history of Christianity and the classical traditions that it draws on, thinking about affirming, working with a notion of a tyrannical ruler as a ruler who prioritizes their own good over the common good. I think that we're surrounded by sort of demagogic and tyrannical forces, and thinking about ways in which religious traditions can help to form us for practices of democracy built on truthfulness and trust and tolerance are, I just keep using this word urgent, Charles, because it all feels urgent today. There are two more things that Kuschel points out about ways in which the work of the parliament and the work of the directive seem to be sort of pro-democracy that I think are really valuable. One is Kuschel says that the parliament is a place where religious traditions come together. He says in a kind of sad aside, even if only for the length of the parliament, they come together and treat one another as peers and equals. So there's a relationship of like being a teacher and being a learner, being a community of religious traditions, religious practitioners. maybe scholars to a lesser extent. That seems like the parliament sort of lifting up and learning from democracy at its best. And second, I really value Kushal's pointing this out. I think about it a lot. I think he's just right. The parliament doesn't content itself with listening to the most authoritative or the most powerful voices within a religious tradition, but it is really special that the parliament is a place where people can claim their place within a religious tradition. We name ourselves as scholars or adherents or practitioners, and we place ourselves as people speaking within that religion, maybe in some way representing it. But I think Kushal calls it a sort of bottom up rather than top down identification of the representatives of religious traditions that I think is, I experienced it, and I think he's just right. I think it's valuable and good. I think what we can do as scholars of religion and practitioners of religion expands when more folks can participate, not just the most powerful or the most obviously authoritative representatives. But I think that's special.
What a unique place to be at McCormick Place in Chicago in August, and having the opportunity to experience over 200 spiritual traditions from 95 countries. That was amazing. And it very much, to your point, is a grassroots event. Yes, we had leaders from certain faith traditions there, but the vast majority, I don't know if they would have been considered leaders, but they were certainly practitioners, people who were living out their faith tradition.
I know there was of course there were leaders, and that was so exciting. It's exciting to hear those powerful voices, but there weren't, at least my experience, I didn't experience gatekeepers. And that's I think something special, a characteristic of the parliament, and special.
You mentioned Kushal's book. Do you have that book with you?
I do.
Can you hold that up to the camera so that if anybody would like to get a copy of that and read it, they can? Now, hopefully you're able to see it. Maybe bring it just a bit closer to the camera.
Sorry,
there we go. So, A Global Ethic. Yeah, I highly recommend the book. Molly recommends the book. I think you would get a lot of good, rich and meaningful information in there to help guide you.
Yeah, there are other ways to get copies of the Global Ethic itself, but these two commentaries I found really, really helpful and interesting. I'd like to learn even more. Could I read out just the last 5 points of the directive that I focused on?
Absolutely. This is a conversation. You notice I'm even enjoying my coffee along the way. So please go ahead.
I'm never without my coffee. So I just wanted to lift up, when I think about Directive 3 as a practical directive, there are 4 just bullet points at the very end that I found really meaningful. I wonder if other people would like to learn from them or to hear them out loud at least. The directive that I focused on ends, to be authentically human in the spirit of our great religious and ethical traditions means the following. I really appreciate this first one. We must not confuse freedom with arbitrariness or pluralism with indifference to truth. I appreciate both sides of that, the honoring and the amplifying of freedom and pluralism, and carving out a space to say that's not the same as being arbitrary or indifferent. I just want to dwell in that bullet point and think about it. I don't think I have loads of clear answers, but I really move toward that as something that I want to think more about. We must cultivate truthfulness in our relationships instead of dishonesty, dissembling, and opportunism. We must constantly seek truth and incorruptible sincerity instead of spreading ideological or partisan half-truths. Maybe today it feels like even less than half-truths. We must courageously serve the truth and we must remain constant and trustworthy instead of yielding to opportunistic accommodation to life. I think back in August, some parts of the Declaration felt like it is good to declare together, and maybe parts of the Declaration left me wanting a little less declaring together and a little more doing together. And I think now in November, I value a little bit more the lesser good that we're striving toward now, of standing together to declare together, standing together to say together, this is how we want to be. It is good to say how we want to be together, in order to pursue like the basic notion of politics, in order to pursue our life together. What is the vision we're aspiring toward? And in these last 4 points, I really appreciate that they lift up what we want to be, and they call out a vision of perhaps what is more familiar and what we want to grow out of, what we want to say yes to and what we want to say no to. I think we should be practical, and I think like we should be people who practice. I think we should do life together. And I think that the Declaration, insofar as it sets a vision of who we want to be and how we want to be and what we want to reject, I think that declaring together goes further than I sort of appreciated back in August.
Declaring together and walking together. By my degrees at least, and by much of what I've done through the years, I'm a practical theologian, and in practical theology, you begin in the messiness of life, and you work together with others to try to find paths forward. And to me, that's a lot of what I'm hearing you say here as well. We can make all these declarations, but we need to work together to bring about that common good in our local communities and around the world.
And of course, I guess maybe of course, I hear the words of the synod too coming through in what you're saying, Charles, the sort of this moment where, for those of us in the Catholic community, in the Catholic Church, we're sort of listening to one another in order to be a church that walks together.
Yeah. Mahan Mirza, whom you know very well, he's our executive director at the Ansari Institute. You know, there are some times when someone says something that you never forget. And I believe I was sitting in a staff meeting with Mahan, and he made this statement: let's imagine the world as it should be. And that has resonated with me ever since. I will never forget that. Let's imagine the world as it should be. And I think to some degree, what he is also saying is that as human beings, we've done a lot, we've messed up a lot, but we still have time to undo that. And so we have to not accept that we have reached a point of no return. We can improve. We can improvise. We're going to have to nuance. We're going to have to pivot. We're going to have to put on that third priestly ear and really listen to other human beings, but we can do it. And Toward a Global Ethic is saying we can do this.
Yeah.
But not only can we do this, we must do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's that, yeah, I think a lot about the importance of being hopeful and humble, right? Sort of the humility, to acknowledge our need for change, and the hope that we can both envision alternatives, and then we can build alternatives. We can do it differently, but it's going to require both of those things: our humility, our willingness to change, and our willingness to learn from new teachers.
The next question that I want to raise, you've touched on a bit, but during the panel conversation at the Parliament, you drew a reference to the preface of the Declaration. The preface of the Declaration states, "It is up to the religions of this earth and to people all over the world, in a quiet, practical way, wherever they are, to make sure that this declaration remains more than paper, that it is filled with life, that it inspires people to a life of mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation. You believe this directive offers a practical way forward. And you've touched already on some of that, but can you elaborate? Tell us a bit more. How
Sure.
does Molly see this directive moving forward in a practical way?
The directive speaks to different communities of people in particular. It speaks to researchers and to scholars and scientists about pursuing the truth. And it makes a couple of points that really that I want to lift up. The first I've already spoken about quite a bit about being for democracy. So the directive asks us to be people who are for democracy and for life together. We're only going to get life if we get it together. I think that the directive helps us sort of start with that opening charge. From there, I think the directive says, I'll just lift up three things that it says. The directive talks about standing against the lying media. I'm using kind of harsh terms, harsher than my own, but I'm paraphrasing the directive. It talks about being against the lying media. When I read that, I remembered something that Pope Francis said. It was a long time ago. It was back in 2016, but it made a big impression on me. Pope Francis, in an interview he gave, I think he was on an airplane or something, he gave an interview and he talked about being people who, it's kind of hard to say, but like being people who don't eat feces, right? Being people who like don't eat what I'll maybe say like garbage. I heard in that a resonance with being people who consume that which is true. For Christians, we can think of how that resonates with ideas of of Eucharistic ideas. Be people who sort of take in, who seek and try to form themselves with that which is true, not people who delight in like garbage, sort of that which is false, for sort of what we use to fuel ourselves and form ourselves. And Pope Francis connected that. He connected this notion of what we take in, what we love to eat. He connected it to hardness of heart. He called for a tender-heartedness rather than a hard-heartedness. There's so much to say about media, social media, AI. I mean, pursuit, like the need for good media outlets and good editorial boards to help us discern what is real around us and what is real in the world. I think that this directive was ahead of its time in saying we need to be people who oppose media that lies to us, people who prioritize taking in that which is good, people who resist the urge to delight in like eating crap. But I don't mean eating crap, I mean something else, but I don't want to say it on the Unsorry podcast, but who sort of think about what forms us and what fuels us. Second, the directive lifts up. It's really pretty incredible to me to think that the directive in 1993 says that we should set ourselves against religious leaders who lie to us. The directive and the declaration overall comes down hard on representatives of religion who are intolerant or fanatical. The declaration seems to me that the declaration is affirming that a good religious leader is a religious leader who offers respect and understanding across difference. I don't think that that's the same. That doesn't necessarily mean, it's not the same as saying it doesn't necessarily mean that we position ourselves against authority or against religious authority, but rather that we position ourselves for the truth and we hold authorities accountable, and demand that they offer that which is true. And third, and this is maybe as much for the person as it is for the community, the directive asks that we tell the truth. And as I read it, I think that the directive asks us to be to call others to truthfulness, and it asks us to be people who do the small, hard thing of seeking out the truth and speaking the truth. Altogether, I think Declaration 3 and the Directive 3 and the Declaration overall talk about a priority of I was going to see if I could find it in my notes, but talk about being people who spend less time like proclaiming or declaring the best parts of our religion at other people and more time letting the best, maybe the prescriptive parts of our wisdom traditions correct ourselves as individuals and our communities. I think part of being honest, part of being accountable, part of making ourselves trustworthy partners to our peers and equals across all kinds of difference is being people who are willing to mine our traditions and let those wisdom words correct ourselves, not just like live on pages and banners. Do you know what I mean? I think that there's sometimes it's fun to like compare the great teachings of the world's traditions and find resonances, and it kind of lives as a banner. But I think rather than sort of always offering it out, I think we're at a moment to let it go to work, reforming and correcting some aspects of ourselves and our communities so that we can be good for each other and for our life together across religious difference.
Yes. Revolutionary toward a global ethic. And this Directive 3 that you're speaking to, if we listen to what you're saying and if we read and listen to what the Parliament has put out, it is revolutionary. And it is a revolutionary love for humanity. Molly, you're the right person to have here and to be speaking on this. I'm so very pleased that you agreed to this. Finally, there were a total of over 6,500 people registered for the Parliament, according to Religion News Service, representing 212 spiritual traditions and 95 countries. The Parliament describes itself as, quote unquote, the world's premier interfaith convening of civic, spiritual, and grassroots change makers. And this was the first time it had gathered in person since 2018. Tell me, what was your experience when you first entered McCormick Place to attend the Parliament? What were a few of your big takeaways?
You know, it was a very, very positive experience for me, Charles. It was really like wonderful and special and good to get to
Had you
join
ever attended anything of that magnitude before?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. The annual meeting of the American Academy of Religion is big, but it didn't feel at all like that to me, to tell you the truth. It felt really different. So we've said a couple of times, you know, it started in 1893. It seems in Chicago, The building that it first met in, the Art Institute of Chicago, was built to house this convening in 1893. There are a lot of things that I love. I think I was trying to remember. I think that the first time that the Parliament of the World's Religions entered my radar was back in 2015. I had a friend who attended the Parliament in Salt Lake City, Utah. Mm-hmm. And they had such a positive experience. And I heard a great deal about how special that experience was. And so since then, for 8 years or so, I have been interested in the Parliament of the World's Religions. And my first impression when I entered was it McCormick, the conference center, was, I walked in along a very broad, long corridor that had all of these banners from all of these different years of the modern parliaments, with themes and dates and places. And Ansari had a banner because of Ansari's special role. There was an Ansari banner, and the Ansari banner said, imagining the world as it should be. And I had a powerful sense of being a part of history and a part of tradition, and having a place in a gathering across difference that I take to be deeply good. And so I was pretty moved. I mean, it was a moving experience. It felt like stepping into something, a tradition, something with roots in history that I value and that I felt so honored to get to be a part of. It was a beautiful place, Lake Michigan is right there. It was a very beautiful experience. There was good weather and sunny days and Lake Michigan and big windows. I think participating there this past August reminded me that it's really hard to gather together 6,000 or 7,000 people in a building in Chicago. Like, the logistics, and I mean, not to be crude, but the expense of it, like, it's not, we can't take it for granted. It's not easy. It's a great privilege. And weighing the logistical challenges and the expense and everything like that. I mean, we had to go through like a security detector and just all of these things, all of the things that are hard about organizing a large group of people in 2023, sort of don't tip the scale at all for me when I think about how the good of human encounter. I mean, to get to meet all of these different kinds of people in this huge hall filled up with all of these tables, like booths of people from around the world and across all kinds of difference, and some people and traditions that were familiar and some that were all new. On the one hand, I got to meet a lot of people. On the other hand, I got to grow in my friendship with and my admiration for some of the other members of the Ansari delegation. And then I guess I have to also add, everybody's favorite thing is the Sikh Langar. I mean, that it's just the tent by the river with these wonderful folks from the Sikh community. I think someone told me that it was a community that had flown up or had made their way up from a different part of the country, which I didn't realize at first. But there's this huge tent filled with Sikh people feeding thousands, and people
all volunteering their time.
And people on the floor, like both the enormous, the scope and scale of this act of giving, and people receiving it, so gratefully, so cheerfully. And all of those cliches about relationships forming over food, are timeless for a reason. It really happens. So I think someone said that this was the real parliament, and it did feel like that too. So the sharing of food, the exchange of ideas for me, one thing that was very special was that I sort of mentioned the American Academy of Religion. I'm so grateful. I love my work and my role as a teacher and as a scholar of religion, but I'm not so often around such large groups of practitioners. I would say my own sense was that at the Parliament, maybe scholars were in the minority and there were more practitioners, and I just it was wonderful. It was wonderful to talk together. So I'm so grateful that I got to go.
And we are so grateful that you were part of this delegation. Thank you. Uh, at the Ansari Institute, we try to bring together, we don't just try, we do. We bring together journalists, policymakers, scholars, faith leaders. Oftentimes, these people operate in silos. And our hope is to bring them together so that they can interact with each other, learn from each other, grow with each other, and then do great work together. And I think about the Parliament, and every bit of that was there. We saw journalists there, we saw policymakers, we saw scholars, we saw faith leaders. One of my friends who was not affiliated with the Ansari Institute came to the Parliament. My friend had a speaking engagement there, and my friend is a political scientist. And she was completely overwhelmed by all the different religions that were there. She wrote about religious people. She would talk about it, but never had she experienced the dynamic multiplicity of faith traditions and people in one place like that. And it just really blew her mind. She was completely overwhelmed. And so I think that the Parliament and I think what we at Ansari do is so important, just bringing people together, getting to know each other. Molly, thank you for sharing some of your time and wisdom with us today. Audience, thank you for listening to another conversation in our series, Engaged, Religion, and the Common Good. Until next time, I'm Charles Powell. Goodbye.